the summer of 2014, headlines across the United States buzzed with excitement over what was being called the most ambitious jungle expedition of the decade. A privately funded research group, backed by a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, announced they were sending a 98-person team into one of the last unmapped regions of dense South American rainforest. It wasn't just science, it was history in the making. Major news outlets covered the launch. Social media exploded with anticipation. They weren't just exploring land. They were stepping into a blank space on the map. The team itself was unlike anything seen before. Former U.S. Army Rangers trained in extreme survival. Award-winning documentary filmmakers with millions of subscribers. Botanists from Ivy League universities. Climate scientists, wildlife experts, satellite technicians, even a psychologist specializing in group behavior under isolation. This wasn't a reckless adventure. It was calculated, organized, prepared down to the smallest detail. They carried cutting-edge GPS systems, military-grade drones, emergency beacons, and enough supplies to last 6 months. The region they chose had always been avoided. Satellite imaging showed irregular topography, strange symmetrical clearings that didn't match natural patterns. Indigenous tribes in nearby areas refused to speak about it directly. When asked what lay beyond the tree line, elders simply said, "The forest keeps what it takes." No one could explain what that meant. But funding was approved anyway. Because in America, mystery doesn't stop exploration, it fuels it. The departure was filmed like a movie premiere. 98 smiling faces boarding transport helicopters at dawn. Families waving. Reporters shouting last-minute questions. One of the lead researchers, Dr. Alan Mercer, confidently told a live camera crew, "In 30 days, we'll know more about this jungle than anyone in history." His confidence felt contagious. The world watched as the helicopters disappeared over a horizon of endless green. For the first 2 weeks, updates streamed back daily. Drone footage of towering canopies. Laughter around campfires. Interviews about unusual plant species. Then the tone shifted. The messages grew shorter. The satellite feeds became unstable. On day 17, during what was supposed to be a routine check-in, the final transmission came through. The video flickered. Dr. Mercer's face looked pale, distracted. Behind him, the jungle was eerily silent. He leaned toward the camera and said, slowly, "We found something. It's not on any map." The screen cut to static. Within 72 hours of the lost transmission, U.S. authorities coordinated with South American officials to launch a full-scale search operation. Military aircraft scanned from above while specialized rescue teams prepared to enter from the nearest accessible border. On paper, it looked straightforward. Retrace the expedition's planned route, follow their last GPS ping, establish ground contact. But from the moment the first helicopter crossed into the region, something felt wrong. Radio communication crackled with interference. Pilots reported sudden drops in instrument stability. The jungle canopy below didn't look natural. It looked layered, too dense, like it was hiding something deliberately. When the first ground team pushed through the tree line, they expected heat, insects, humidity, the usual brutality of rainforest terrain. What they didn't expect was silence. No birds, no monkeys, no distant rustling. A jungle without sound feels unnatural, almost staged. One rescue ranger later told investigators it felt like walking into a room where a conversation had just stopped. Even the air felt heavy, thick in the lungs, as if the forest itself resisted being inhaled. Then the equipment started failing. GPS units, brand new, military-calibrated, began drifting off course by miles. Compasses spun slowly at first, then violently, refusing to settle north. Drones launched to scout ahead lost signal mid-flight and dropped straight down into the canopy. One drone camera, recovered after crashing, showed footage that made technicians uneasy. The trees below didn't remain still. They seemed to shift subtly between frames. Not swaying in wind, repositioning. As if pathways that existed seconds earlier had been swallowed whole. By the 5th day of searching, rescue teams noticed something even more disturbing. Trails they had cut with machetes were disappearing overnight. Vines regrew unnaturally fast. Marked trees could not be relocated the next morning. It wasn't just difficult terrain. It felt reactive. A sergeant in the 2nd Search Unit radioed back a statement that was logged but never released publicly. "It's like the jungle doesn't want us following them." Local guides hired to assist refused to go any deeper after the first week. One older guide, who had spent his life navigating rainforests, stood at the edge of the thickest region and quietly said, "This place is breathing." When asked what he meant, he pressed his palm against the trunk of a massive tree and whispered, "You can feel it if you stand still long enough." Several members of the rescue team later admitted that, at night, when the wind died down completely, the forest made a low, rhythmic sound. Not wind. Not animals. Something slower. Like a giant pair of lungs. On the 9th day of the search, the first tangible evidence of the expedition's path emerged. A clearing in the jungle, faintly visible from satellite imagery, revealed a campsite that seemed frozen in time. Rescue teams approached cautiously, their boots sinking into damp soil, machetes cutting through thick undergrowth. The tents were still upright, though the fabric was streaked with mud and dripping with condensation. Equipment lay scattered in neat rows, backpacks zipped, water bottles full, notebooks open. No sign of struggle, no indication that the inhabitants had left in a panic. It was as if the people had vanished into thin air. Food remained untouched on makeshift tables. Plates of dried rations, half-eaten fruit, and containers of preserved meat were left exactly where they had been set down. Rescue personnel noted that the smell of rot and decay had already begun to rise, yet no animals or insects seemed to touch it. Normally, abandoned food attracts a swarm of jungle life in hours. Here, it was untouched, eerily pristine amid the chaos of the surrounding forest. One team member later muttered, "It's like the forest itself was guarding them or keeping them." The footprints surrounding the campsite were the most unnerving discovery. 98 sets, just as many as had entered the jungle, all leading deeper into the forest. None returned. No signs of turning back, no scuffle, no trail of desperation. The tracks were precise, almost disciplined, as though the group had been following a pattern, or something. Investigators combed through the soil for clues, fragments of clothing, footprints intersecting at odd angles, marks that might indicate tools. Yet everything suggested an orderly departure, not a frantic escape. Every expert involved felt a chill, realizing the people hadn't been lost. They had followed something, willingly. The jungle around the campsite seemed almost alive in response to their presence. Trees that had appeared solid from a distance had twisted, their branches forming natural barricades that funneled the rescuers down narrow, winding paths. Shadows shifted where none should have been. Strange formations in the underbrush suggested movement, but when flashlights swept over them, nothing remained. One botanist on the team swore she glimpsed figures in the corner of her eye, just beyond the trees, moving perfectly in sync with the search party, then vanishing when she blinked. Nervous laughter broke the tension for a moment, until everyone realized no one else had seen it. By the end of the day, the rescue teams were exhausted, and morale was beginning to crack. Radios remained spotty, drones had been lost to the canopy, and the deeper the team pushed, the more alien the environment became. Yet the trail of footprints continued, disappearing into a part of the jungle so dense and impenetrable that maps were useless. Commanders on the ground exchanged uneasy glances. They had found the first clue, but the clue offered no answers. Only more questions. Months passed after the failed search, and the official efforts were quietly called off. Most of the world had moved on, assuming the 98 adventurers were lost forever. But deep in the shadows of the jungle, something was not finished. Then, without warning, 3 men emerged. Thin, gaunt, and almost skeletal from months of exposure, they stumbled out of the dense foliage onto a dirt road near a small village. At first, locals didn't recognize them, faces sunken, eyes wild, voices hoarse from lack of air. Their clothes were tattered, gear ruined by rain, and yet there was something in the way they moved, precise, purposeful, almost rehearsed. They weren't just survivors, they were changed. For 2 full days, the men refused to speak. They sat quietly in hospital rooms, staring at walls as if seeing the forest behind them. Every time anyone asked what had happened, their eyes flicked to some unseen point in the distance. Nurses and doctors noted a pattern. All 3 would wake at exactly 3:17 a.m., shivering, sweating, and screaming. Not nightmares in the conventional sense, but coordinated terror. The sounds weren't human, low, guttural cries that seemed to carry the resonance of a crowd. When questioned, they whispered only a single word: "It called us." Eventually, under careful questioning, fragments of their story began to emerge. They spoke of a sound, low, humming, constant, that followed them wherever they went. Not the hum of machinery or the roar of animals, but something older, something alive. At night, it would crescendo, vibrating through their bones. One of the survivors described it as the forest breathing through something ancient, while another claimed the sound had a rhythm, like a heartbeat, that matched the pace of their own steps. Whatever it was, it drew them deeper into the jungle, further than anyone had ever gone. The men recounted how the sound seemed to communicate. Sometimes it was a whisper of directions, other times it was a promise, almost seductive in nature. People in their group had begun to respond unconsciously, walking into darker areas without hesitation. Some laughed, some cried, some simply walked in silence. And every night, no matter how far they tried to run, the sound returned, louder, insistent, commanding. It was not just a sound. It was a presence. Something that watched, waited, and knew their fears intimately. Even in their brief moments of lucidity, the survivors admitted that the jungle itself seemed to move with the sound. Trees creaked, shadows shifted, and the underbrush appeared rearranged. What had been solid paths one night were gone the next. One survivor swore he saw silhouettes of the missing team members walking ahead of them, always at the edge of vision, beckoning, never turning back. It was as if the forest had a rhythm of its own, and the 98 had been swept into it. When authorities finally coaxed the 3 survivors into revealing details of what happened, the story sounded impossible, like a fevered dream written by the jungle itself. They claimed that after weeks of being drawn deeper by the humming sound, they stumbled upon something completely hidden from the outside world. Ruins. Massive stone structures, ancient and covered in dense vines, entirely swallowed by the forest. The architecture was alien in design, geometric in ways that no civilization in the region had ever built. Walls rose impossibly high, doors led nowhere, and carvings hinted at rituals long forgotten. These ruins, they said, were alive in a way that defied reason. Inside the structures, the humming grew louder, vibrating through every surface. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural. It pulsed in patterns, almost communicative, like it was trying to teach them something. One survivor described how he could feel the sound in his chest, a rhythm syncing with his heartbeat. Another swore he could hear whispers, dozens of them, layered over the hum, speaking in tongues that were unintelligible yet oddly familiar. They claimed that some team members began following the sound of their own accord, almost mesmerized, as though compelled by an unseen force. The survivors spoke of nights spent in the ruins where the rules of time and space seemed to bend. Days melted into nights. Pathways in and out of the stone structures shifted. Rooms would appear where none had existed before. Shadows moved against the walls, often glimpsed from the corner of an eye but vanishing when confronted directly. Occasionally, one of the team members would simply step into a shadow and disappear, leaving behind only a faint echo of laughter or whispering that none of the others could explain. Fear began to twist into something darker, a strange fascination that made leaving almost impossible. Some of the team started acting differently, almost as if the jungle had rewritten their minds. One survivor described how people smiled at danger, approached edges of cliffs, or stepped willingly into areas others considered impassable. Another spoke of moments when members of the expedition would respond to invisible commands, walking toward darkness, sometimes laughing, sometimes singing. Attempts to pull them back were futile. They said the humming and the whispers carried authority, shaping behavior in a way that no human voice could. Resistance felt painful, as if the forest itself rejected it. The 3 men insisted that it wasn't a trap or a mere hallucination. The forest wasn't cruel, it was deliberate. It chose who would continue, who would vanish, and who might survive, if they were lucky. Every decision, every step deeper, felt guided by the sound and the structures around them. By the time they realized the gravity of what was happening, the majority of the 98 were gone. Only a handful remained near the 3 when they finally escaped. And those who did escape were not the same. Each carried marks, mental and physical, that hinted the jungle's influence extended far beyond the visible world. When investigators finally examined the 3 survivors' belongings, what they found was far more disturbing than anyone could have anticipated. Among the wrecked backpacks and mud-streaked gear, one of the men carried a small, unassuming stone artifact, no larger than a fist. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, gray, rough, and covered in what seemed like natural lichen. But when thermal imaging was applied, the stone pulsed with a faint heat, almost as if it were alive. Scientists and paranormal experts alike were baffled. Nothing in the known world should have exhibited such behavior. It radiated a presence, subtle but undeniable, like the pulse of a hidden heartbeat. As days went by, strange phenomena began surrounding the men. The hospital room where the artifact was kept registered irregular electromagnetic readings. Equipment malfunctioned, lights flickered in rhythmic patterns, and surveillance cameras occasionally captured shadows moving independently of any person. Nurses and doctors reported cold drafts and whispers that seemed to emanate from the stone itself, even when it was stored in a sealed container. One attending physician later confessed that he sometimes felt as though he was being observed, though no one else was in the room. The atmosphere around the artifact was oppressive, suffocating, as if it carried the jungle itself with it. Even more alarming, 2 of the 3 survivors began showing signs of severe distress. Night after night, they awoke at exactly 3:17 a.m., screaming uncontrollably, their eyes wide and fixated on some unseen point in the darkness. Medical examinations revealed no apparent cause. Heart rates were erratic, stress hormones off the charts, yet their physical bodies showed no trauma. Psychologists involved in the case noted that both men had started speaking in tongues intermittently, uttering phrases none of the staff could comprehend, sometimes in unison. It was as if the artifact carried not only a presence but a memory, or worse, a will of its own. Within weeks, the unthinkable happened. Both of the distressed survivors died suddenly of apparent heart failure, each at precisely 3:17 a.m., the same time their nightly episodes had begun. Autopsies revealed nothing unusual. Medically, their deaths should have been impossible. The only constant was the artifact, still pulsing, still warm, still silently radiating whatever ancient influence had begun its work in the jungle. Authorities considered securing the artifact, but every attempt to move or transport it was met with inexplicable interference. Vehicles stalled, security systems failed, and even satellite trackers inexplicably lost connection during attempts to remove it. The 3rd survivor, already quiet and reserved, grew increasingly erratic. Security footage from the high-security facility where he was held shows him calmly walking out one night, completely unnoticed. No doors unlocked, no alarms triggered. He simply disappeared into the darkness. Staff reported afterward that the artifact remained behind, pulsing more intensely than ever, as though marking its new absence. Questions arose immediately. Had the survivor taken the artifact with him, or had it been left behind? Either scenario suggested something far beyond human understanding, that whatever they had brought back from the jungle was not just dangerous, but sentient, with a purpose that had yet to reveal itself. A year after the harrowing escape of the 3 survivors, whispers began circulating about an unusual signal intercepted by amateur shortwave radio enthusiasts deep in the South American jungles. The signal was brief, distorted, and impossible to trace initially. When investigators finally analyzed it, the coordinates matched precisely with the original expedition site, the place where 98 had entered and only 3 had returned. What made the transmission so terrifying wasn't just its origin, but its content. A voice, weak, garbled, and shaking, spoke slowly, yet with a resonance that suggested more than one person. It was human, yet not entirely human, as though filtered through something ancient and unseen. The voice began to speak cryptic words, phrases that made seasoned linguists uneasy. "We weren't lost, we were chosen, it's spreading," the transmission repeated in broken sentences. Analysts noted a peculiar pattern, layered whispers in the background, faint but distinct, numbering at least 95 separate tones. They were overlapping, moving rhythmically, almost conversational. Each layer seemed to echo the others, creating a chorus of voices that were both coherent and alien. The chilling realization struck everyone monitoring the signal. The voices matched the number of the missing team members. 95 lost souls, or something wearing their voices, were broadcasting from deep within the jungle. Technicians attempted to enhance the signal, hoping to decipher more of the message, but every adjustment revealed more anomalies. The audio warped, producing frequencies that caused discomfort and unease in anyone listening for longer than a few minutes. Instruments recorded inexplicable magnetic fluctuations during playback. Observers in multiple locations reported headaches, nausea, and a creeping sense of being watched. Even hardened FBI analysts and military communications specialists described a palpable dread, as though the voices carried intent, an intelligence reaching out, not merely transmitting sound. Some of the most experienced field operatives hypothesized that the jungle itself might be communicating through these voices. Others suspected that whatever had claimed the expedition had learned to manipulate sound and perception to reach beyond its borders. The repeated phrases hinted at purpose, not chaos, but planning. The word spreading suggested that the influence, whatever it was growing, reaching outward, possibly targeting new victims. The eerie synchrony of the voices made it feel like the jungle had become a networked consciousness, a hive mind speaking through the echoes of the lost. Even now, the source remains active sporadically, undetectable to satellites and nearly impossible to record clearly. Attempts to return to the coordinates have been met with inexplicable resistance. Helicopters losing instruments mid-flight, teams finding paths that shift and vanish, and local authorities enforcing strict no-entry zones. Analysts reviewing the original signal have noted that, occasionally, certain words can be heard distinctly when the wind is just right, a whisper that seems to call directly to the listener, bending perception and reality at once. And though the world has mostly forgotten the story of the 98 who entered the jungle, the transmission serves as a chilling reminder. Something ancient, intelligent, and patient still resides within, waiting, watching, and sending messages that few dare to hear. As the signal faded into static, a chilling thought settled over everyone listening. The jungle didn't just claim the lost, it learned from them. The 98 had entered as explorers, and whatever remained inside had grown stronger, smarter, and hungrier. No one knows if the remaining voices were the original people or something far older wearing their identities. And somewhere, deep in that impossible forest, the sound continues, pulsing, whispering, calling. Some say it reaches those who dare to listen, promising knowledge, adventure, or worse. The question now isn't if the jungle will take more. It's who will hear the call next. Because one day, the breathing of the forest might reach your doorstep.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.